up, I'd like to introduce Steve Schoch. Steve is the CFO of 23andMe, a leading consumer genetics and research company. 23andMe was valued at over $2 billion in 2017, and in 2018 raised $300 million at an unknown valuation. It has a subscribership of 500 million customers, which contains 6 billion DNA base pairs of code in their most recent partnership. And interviewing Steve will be Brent Trademan, a partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures and has been involved from the very beginning of the fund. Please help me in welcoming Steve and Brent.
You're on the left. I'll be on the far. Yeah, you're right here. Okay, well, welcome. Steve, thank you so much for being here today.
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
One of my personal favorite unicorns in Silicon Valley. And I'll just start off. Let's just do a quick introduction just to tell everybody kind of who Steve is and who 23andMe is, if you guys aren't already. But real quick, I'm a venture partner at the fund and been with the company really since the beginning. I look at new seed stage and Series A type companies and also do some fundraising for the firm abroad. So I'll let Steve do a quick intro, but as mentioned before, he's the CFO at 23andMe, a multi-billion-dollar valued company in Silicon Valley. And I just want to say thanks again for being here, and I'll let you do a quick background. And he's got a really interesting background for being in a tech company.
Thanks. The common thread is for me is finance. So I've been in finance my whole career. I had a brief stint as a CEO in my last job, but mostly been a finance leader. I've been lucky enough to be kind of bookending a couple of interesting gigs in the internet era. So in the first wave of internet companies, I was the chief financial officer of eToys, who was one of the pioneers in internet commerce, and so kind of got to experience the world at the beginning of the flight of capital into this world, and here I sit now at 23andMe. Also, in its private years, and eToys I took public, so I was with it in its private years and into its public years, and so it kind of had a fascinating ride. I've also spent some time in biotechnology and in media, and so my last job was as CEO and CFO of the film studio Miramax, and we don't have time to talk here about the commonalities between the film business and biotech, but there actually are, from the point of view of how capital is allocated and risk goes and building intellectual property, but that's for another day.
Yeah, so that is fascinating. It's just, you just don't find folks coming from LA film industry working in tech so much, but I do, you do see a lot of similarities here that we've talked about. Just want to do a quick show of hands from the audience. Who right now is a startup entrepreneur? Okay. Who's fundraising right now in the audience? Wave them high. Okay. Anybody into biotech or healthcare? All right. Okay. So you probably know what 23andMe is. Anybody use 23andMe or any type of genetic? Okay. Great.
Come on, we got to do better than that.
There you go. So one of the things, you get, with millions of customers, you just never know. And, a lot of what we'll talk about today is just, the privacy of it all and where that's going and kind of what you guys do. But with that, the business right now, I think you guys are in 40-something countries, right? You guys have really grown to, I think, almost 800 million has been raised by 23andMe. And Steve wasn't at the seed and Series A, where a lot of us are grinding out there and doing those pitch meetings early on. But you've come in a little bit later. I mean, some of the investors at 23andMe are Sequoia, NEA, Google Ventures, and then from the corporate side, some really interesting companies that have come in and really have seen the strategic value of 23andMe. And if you could talk about that, I know recently your CEO was talking about GlaxoSmithKline, Roche, Fidelity, and some other big pharma companies coming in to invest in you guys. I just want to talk about that from a strategic way, why you guys chose to bring them in and why they chose to work with 23andMe.
Sure, yeah. So first of all, the the evolution of the capital markets has created, this big and rapidly growing pool. And I know you've heard from some other players in that late stage, growth capital game earlier today. But it's really a phenomenal thing for companies that are going through an evolution that takes some time to be able to continue the mission of getting yourself ready to be kind of a card-carrying member of the public market out there in the right way. Along the way, we've had investors that are classic venture that have come in those early stages. We've also had venture that used to only play in the early stages come into this late stage and fund with us. We've had, as you said, Fidelity, companies that historically would have been primarily focused in the public world, come down to the late stage growth world and put some money in. Companies like GSK are strategic investors. We're in an operating collaboration to develop targets for drug discovery with them, and that's ongoing. And they chose to invest in the company side by side, and we like that. It aligns incentives and motivations and that sort of thing. So, some financial, some strategic, and as a 13-year-old company, we're even going through a little bit of a changing of the guard. We have some of our, earlier stage investors that are timing out, and we've had some changing of the guard, which is pretty natural. And fortunately for us, the market cap is big enough that a secondary market has developed, and there's really relatively fluid movement of positions that go on now.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing taking place in just fundraising in general. And a lot of us that are out there, whether you're on the VC side or you're an entrepreneur, the options today are much more than they were 13 years ago or 14 years ago when you guys were going for your seed, Series A. There's crowdfunding, there's security tokens, there's all these types of new ways to get access to capital. And you guys are in kind of hyper growth mode, I feel like right now, with raising 900 or 800 million, and at a late stage, if you were to recommend something for somebody in seed or Series A, or somebody going out to fundraise for the first time, I've always talked to companies like, let's make sure you get the right investors early on. Don't just take anybody's money. Make sure you're taking the right money, because it'll pay off when you're going to raise at the end, right? Or near the end. So can you just speak to that? Just why the company has chosen these investors and how it has paid off for you guys?
We've had some of our investors that have been with us the entire journey. In fact, they go through a process of moving the position from one fund to another in order to stay with us as things time out. I think it's most important, and if Ann Wojcicki were here, she could articulate the original vision, because she said it much better than I. But there was a very long-term vision that's playing out here 13 years later as we've moved into taking our collection, our large collection of DNA data and other data that we have, and using it to fuel a drug target hunting exercise and drug discovery exercise to find therapies for conditions that don't have good choices. And that was always the long-term vision. But you can imagine that felt a long ways away when you hadn't sold the first kit, and you were just trying to figure out whether there was a market, whether you could put it out there at the right price point and get people to do it en masse, and that you could develop the technology to mine that data, for the benefit, among other things, of drug discovery. And so investors in those days heard that vision, saw that vision, and looked at Ann and sort of felt like she has a vision, and we feel like she's going to be able to realize it. And it's I think amazing that we're here and we're now in that stage of the company after such a period of time. And some of those investors are still with us. Some of those original investors are still with us. And I think the ingredients that you have to have at that moment in time when you're doing your Series A, you have to have a pathway that looks like it has steps that are feasible, and that it's big. It's a big opportunity, and then somebody in charge that has the background and knowledge to, to see that through.
Yeah, it's such an important thing. And when I talk to entrepreneurs and they come in, I look to see what, who they're meeting with or who they've recently taken funds from. And you're absolutely right about aligning the incentives, where you can go to, if you're a startup that's in one specific sector and there's value at this large Fortune 500, you should go after them, right? And go find whoever the right person is to say, this is our vision, this is going to help your growth of your current products, here's why you should invest in us. And then you go to do that to all their competitors too or whatever, so you're not biased to one. But that is a proven model that's been working really well in the Bay Area lately. And I see that with 23andMe. Just so everybody knows too, there's the ancestry piece of the business, right? And that's the $99, you get your ancestry. Can you just speak to kind of, the products you have today, kind of why have you chosen to have those products, how you differentiate compared to your competitors there?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, so we have two versions of our service. So we have the ancestry-only product, and then we have the health and ancestry product. That second product is an FDA regulated product. It's considered a diagnostic under the FDA regulations, and this company had to go through a very torturous period of submitting to the regulation of that product by the FDA, and it was kind of a pause in the growth of the company along the pathway because they had to stop and get compliant. The ancestry-only product is a pure consumer product. It's not regulated, and it's really for information, for fun, for sharing with family and all those sorts of things. And they kind of operate in two somewhat distinct competitive sets. The diagnostic, the health and ancestry product, doesn't really have another direct-to-consumer such product. It's FDA approved, so we operate relatively freely there. We have several competitors in the ancestry-only business, and thus the different price point. But both of those feed data into our database. We've passed the 10 million customer mark just recently, and so we're continuing to grow quite well. And both of those products contribute to that database.
Yeah, so that's interesting because now you're, compared to the competitors that only do ancestry, you've got this other new product that's taken years to figure out from a regulatory standpoint. Gives you the leg up to go create and build other things.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So one of those things I wanted to talk about, if you guys have seen the recent news in the past couple years about, I think there was a 60 Minutes on it, and it's been, if you guys have been reading the news about, here in California, there was something called the Golden State Killer, and all these things about privacy and data. And, I put my trust in your company, just like what's going around with Facebook and all these other things, and we're hoping that the company is a trustworthy company. How do you guys see that within the news right now? Is that a opportunity for you guys? If you can just speak to the privacy and the how you're protecting the users and keeping that trust.
I wouldn't even call it an opportunity. It's a responsibility, right? And the word trust is kind of the foundational part of it, because if we had a breach, the destruction of trust in our product would be devastating to the company because of the highly personal nature of DNA data. So we put a lot of effort and a lot of resources into the way that we structure how we hold the data from a security point of view, and then we go through elaborate steps to make sure that every individual that buys the service, whether it's one or the other product, is in control of their data throughout its life. So they have to permission us for the data to be used in research. They have to permission for the data to be shared within for instance, our DNA relatives function on the Ancestry product, where you can link up with other, relatives you don't even know exist, kind of thing. And all of that everything's permissioned, and you can unpermission it whenever you want. The Golden State Killer case, the Cambridge Analytica issue that arose last year, those were real in terms of people turning to companies like us and saying, am I okay with you, right? And we had from a comms point of view, we had to be proactive in making sure that people understood how we go about things. And And it's just continual vigilance on the security front. On the privacy front, it's just making sure that we're always respectful. So, if you have data that's with us, you can ask us to remove it, right? If you've done the service, the data's sitting in our database and you don't want it there anymore, you can actually take your data and take it somewhere else. And like the GSK, the Golden State Killer case, was an example of a public repository of DNA data where people had taken their data.
You want to tell them that story real quick? I don't think everybody knows that story.
And it was data that was accessed by law enforcement officials because it was publicly accessible, but people had chosen specifically to put their data in that publicly accessible database. We don't, that's not what we do, and we would never share it because we put you in control of it. And so we give people permission to do whatever they want with their data.
That's interesting. That's owning your own data is something that now the generation in the room right now, the younger generation, I would say, is they totally get.
Right.
Certain generations have no concept of that, or there's inherent trust in the system. But it's interesting that what we are hearing in the news every day right now is, how is my information going to make me money, and those types of things, and with new technologies and all those types of things. Do you ever see your products getting to that point where it's a reversal, and it's actually, you can make so much money with that data that you can pay people to come in, and then all of a sudden we have a wealth of information, your company can have that, and then go develop awesome drugs with these companies, right? So
I don't see that anytime soon because the costs are still high for producing the results that we produce, for everything from the kit to the microarray that we use to the processing in the lab, and all of the data analytics, because every single person is an individual data analytics process when we compare them against the database, and so a lot of expenses with this, and so it's not something that we have a lot of flexibility to sort of say we should pay you for that. We need to get paid for it right now so that we can that we can get ourselves on a profitability path, and then we're using that data to fuel research to find cures on our biotech business, and that's a purely voluntary opt-in as well, because you opt in to be part of research. Generally, what you find is people that have conditions of any type that we may be pursuing to find better therapies for are more than happy to have that data shared if it will help find
There's
something.
pride in it, right?
So we have a very high opt-in rate to research.
That's great.
Very high opt-in rate.
So the people that choose to
Right.
give their data for a better cause, right?
Right.
So like donating their data, right? Like they do organs or something like that. So one of the things, you talked about growth, and you talked about path to profitability, I think you just said.
Yes.
And that's such an important thing for startups that today, a lot of companies you'll see doing IPOs that are losing money hand over fist. How do you see that with the current stage of where you guys are growing right now, as every company, at some point needs to be profitable for long-term longevity? When do you think, tell the audience right now, like, do you look at that at early stage raises, or do you focus on user growth? It's always the question, right? Do we pay developers and engineers? Do we market, or do we focus on revenue generating things so we're a profitable company quickly?
Yeah, no, it's a little. To me, it's a little stage based. And a company is kind of a living organism in a way, with an analogy to a human being, where you sort of think about it and say, and the capital markets are the parent in this analogy. And so, when you're an early stage company, you're going to ask somebody for some Series A money. The things that are characteristics that I think the providers of capital look at are all about the size of the idea. Is it a big addressable market? Is it something that no one else is addressing right now? Do you have first mover advantage? Do you have a vision for where this is going? There's usually not a lot of so in a way it's kind of like a cute infant, right? In the human analogy, where you're not much is expected of you in the way of responsibility for yourself financially. You're going to spend money. They expect that. They want to see that there is a vision that gets you someplace else. But along that continuum, you start to grow up, just like a human being grows from that cute baby that doesn't really have to take any accountability for itself financially. It's just a money suck, right, that's going on, and you believe you're going to grow that child into a, to a successful adult. But you get along the continuum, and the capital does, and it should, start to hold you accountable for, show me now that you see a way to get to profitability someday, which starts with unit economics, right? Are you, you got a lot of capital kind of expenditures going into technology and infrastructure and those sorts of things, and marketing, but can I start to see things coming together that as your kind of unit size grows, do I have unit level profitability in the picture somewhere? Because if I don't have that, I'm missing the basic element of getting to profitability someday. And you go back to, I mean, I've just loved watching how Amazon and Jeff Bezos have surfed through, the beginning stages. They were a direct competitor of ours in the early days. And, what they definitely had in the early days is they had order level economics working for them, right? They were spending a lot of money expanding, putting things in place that were capital type expenditures and growth type expenditures, but underneath it, you could see order level economics such that when the order count went up, as long as you could hold, and improve that order level economics, they were going to get to break even and better someday. Yeah. And I think all companies somewhere along the continuum have to get to that. Eventually you get to this kind of growth stage, which our company's in, and I liken it, in the human analogy to being now you're a teenager, right?
Yep.
You've grown up. You actually, your parent, the capital providers, sort of say you have to have some responsibility. Maybe get a part-time job, do whatever you're doing to get ready for that next stage of life. And so they should be asking of you, show me tangible evidence that you can both grow it and you can get that underlying, kind of unit level profitability in the right configuration to get you to the promised land. Because the next step in your life is that moment when you graduate from college and your parents say, I'm done with you, right? I'm not giving you any more money. And they send you out in the world, which is the time you go public, and you better be able to stand on your own 2 feet, get a job, and make ends meet, right? Wow. And so it all happens in a continuum, but you have to recognize when you're going for money that there's going to be increasing accountability while you're trying to make sure you don't get in the way of every bit of growth you can get. That growth has to eventually be coupled with some semblance of unit level, lowest level kind of profitability that with scale will overcome all of your other fixed costs and get you where you need to go.
Yeah, what a great analogy of the evolution of a startup. That's exactly, it's so fitting. So, and get a good CFO to help you at the end, right? To make sure you know what you're doing.
Yes, hire lots of them. Everybody needs one.
Great, well thanks so much, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
so
happy to be here.
Yep.
Thanks a lot. You're going off this way?
Thank you so much, you guys. We now have a special token of appreciation for you.